last night's show with George Norrie after he'd been on with Larry King Live and did exceedingly well, I might add, then you already know a little bit about what's coming up tonight. Both an update on Bigfoot. Perhaps you've heard the story about the reputed, anyway, audio that has been recorded of Bigfoot, which we'll talk about with Todd Standing coming up, but also some other updates as well from the man who knows everything about the cryptozoological giant. And then next hour, I don't think you want to miss this story. The little known and never known as well before story of Hitler's secret mission to kidnap all of the important top cardinals and bishops in the Vatican, including the Pope, very likely to execute all of the cardinals, perhaps to also kill the Pope, and then, most importantly, to loot the treasures of the Vatican. And the SS Nazi general that stood in his way, never before. The details in this book and what you will learn about this intentionally failed effort to kidnap the Pope will astound you. And this secret mission has rarely gotten the kind of examination that you will hear tonight. I've been tracking stories about the distinct evil of the Nazi Empire for years, and yet there's things in this book, so many oh wow moments in the research of Dan Kurzman. You don't want to miss it. Coming up next hour, some crypto news to get to before Todd Standing on the way. It's Coast to Coast AM, and my name's Ian Punnett. Before we get to Todd Standing coming up in just a moment to end the crypto news for tonight, let me just do a little housekeeping thing if I can on Coast to Coast AM. We are in the midst of a free Streamlink weekend. You can sign up and get details on the homepage. The free weekend runs through Monday. Free weekenders are able to download 8 free shows from the past few months, including the one I did a couple of months ago with Charles Lindbergh Jr. that people are still talking about. Everybody's still waiting to see whether or not he'll end up being right. And try out exciting features such as the classic shows, the live broadcast, audio clips, and the newest edition, the podcast with iTunes, which automatically downloads our most recent shows. So go take a look at it online, coasttocoastam.com, where you will also see some great crypto news stories we'll get to. For some regular headlines, President Vladimir Putin has angered Americans at a high level with his plans to deploy a missile shield in Eastern Europe. Formally notified the NATO governments on Saturday that Russia will suspend its obligations under the Conventional Forces in Europe Treaty, a key Cold War-era arms limitation agreement. They've put a deadline of 150 days for this action by Putin, and we'll know more whether or not they can negotiate a new settlement within that time frame. Democrats John Edwards and Hillary Rodham Clinton, considering themselves among the top presidential candidates, were caught by Fox News microphones discussing their desire to limit future joint appearances to exclude some lower rivals after the forum in Detroit on Thursday. I think this is important because of conversations we've had in the past about some of the quote-unquote lesser candidates that are out there that have a lot of popularity on the web and on this show. John Edwards says we should try to have a more serious and smaller group. That's what he's overheard saying. Meanwhile, Senator Clinton agrees, saying we've got to cut the number. They're not serious. She also says that she thought their campaigns had already tried to limit the debates and says, quote, we've got to get back to it. Immediately, Representative Dennis Kucinich responded that any group that's smaller, he ought to be automatically included in because on the campaign trail, nobody's smaller than he is. Osama bin Laden has a new video out, but investigators aren't sure how old the tape is. The tape praising jihadists may have been made recently, but bin Laden's part may be old. According to Wang Guang in crypto news, which you can find more on at coasttocoastam.com, Wang Guang, a name that's funny in like every language except Chinese, director of the Weather Modification Department in China, says each of China's more than 30 provinces and province-level municipalities today boast a weather modification base. employing more than 32,000 people across China, 100 anti-aircraft guns, which launch these weather modification missiles essentially into the air, about 5,000 special rocket launchers, and 30-odd aircraft across the country, all geared toward weather modification. Let's see, what radio show had been talking about that forever before it started to make mainstream news? Ours is the largest artificial weather program in the world in terms of equipment, size, and budget, Wang said, adding that the annual nationwide budget for weather modification in China is between $60 million and $90 million U.S. dollars. For a largely agrarian country like China, the weather was thought of as far too important to be left to the whim of gods or nature. As a result, Chinese scientists began researching man-made rain as far back as 1958, and now China's weather officials have been charged with another important task, ensuring clear skies for the Summer Olympic Games next year. So they've brought in an important outside consultant, Simon Bar-Sinister. We'll see what happens. Reuters reports a walking robot that adapts to different terrain is helping scientists understand how humans move and could one day lead to improved treatment for spinal cord and other injuries. That, according to German researchers on Friday. Previously, Runbot, the robot's inventors, said the 1-foot-tall machine could only walk forward on flat surfaces and would topple over when encountering a slope. But using an infrared eye, the robot can now detect an incline in its path and adjust its gait. You can see more on that at coasttocoastam.com. A key is the robot's brain. In this case, the infrared eye connected to the control circuits, which directs the machine to change its gait when needed. Studying a robot to gain a better understanding of how different parts of the body work when walking could have practical applications to improve health care in humans. Scientists have a way to go, however. As of right now, the robot takes 4 or 5 tries before it corrects itself and inexplicably seems like it cannot avoid running into ironing boards. Hey, that's just like me. One guy who has found his own scientific help in walking is also in China. In fact, there's a couple of Chinese stories here. We'll try and get them all in. When Peng Shulin's body was cut literally in half by a truck in 1995, it was a little short of a medical miracle that he lived. It took a team of more than 20 doctors to save his life. Skin was grafted from his head to seal what was left of his torso. But the legless Mr. Peng was left standing only 2.5 feet tall. Doctors at the China Rehabilitation Research Center in Beijing found out about Mr. Peng's plight late last year and devised a plan to get him walking again. And you can see the photos of this. It's fascinating. They came up with an ingenious way to allow him to walk on his own, creating a sophisticated egg cup-like casing to hold his body with 2 bionic legs attached to it. He's been taking his first steps around the center with the aid of these specially adapted legs and a resized walking frame. Go take a look at it. Mr. Peng, who has to learn how to walk again, said it's delighted. He's delighted with the device. It's very cool. The pictures are at coasttocoastam.com. Look at the link. While you're there, check out the photos of the world's tallest man, Bao Shishung, shaking hands with He Pingping, who might be Earth's shortest man. It's one of those contrived press photos. Hey, let's get the world's tallest Chinese guy with the world's smallest Chinese guy together and see what happens kind of things, but it's really interesting. You can see what happens, by the way, in the picture. In order to shake hands, if you look at the photo, you'll see there's another guy steadying He Pingping so that Bao Shishun doesn't, accidentally greet him out the window. Best part of the story? As it turns out, the world's tallest man and the world's smallest man actually hail from the same region of Inner Mongolia, and wouldn't you know it, went to the same high school at the same time and never knew each other. Different circle of friends, I guess. Frank Donnelly from the Detroit News reports from Marquette, Michigan. In the middle of the night, a group tried to lure an elusive beast from its lair deep in the woods. A man banged on a tree with a stick. Another beat his chest, Tarzan-like. Another uttered deep, guttural screams. And then seconds after the last yell, from the blackness surrounding them, came a low-pitched howl that made the searchers shiver. It was Bigfoot, at least they claim. The searchers not only believe the legendary Manish ape is frolicking throughout the forest east of this Upper Peninsula community, but also captured its mournful yelp on tape Thursday night. The Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization, the California group running the search, will add the audio recording to what it said are footprints, sightings, and other mounting evidence from past expeditions. I'm not a believer, I'm a knower, said the group's president, Matt Moneymaker. You've had to be in total denial to say that none exist. Don Young, a hunting and fishing guide from Phillips, Wisconsin, said he has wanted to prove the existence of Bigfoot ever since spotting one near his home a second time in 2004. It's a need, he said. There's a need for me to prove it. Since the last sighting, he has devoted 60 hours a week looking for the beast. Sound familiar? Todd Standing can relate to this kind of obsession, and he joins us here on Coast to Coast AM. Thank you so much, Todd.
Thanks for having me.
I'll give you a standing ovation I'm sure you hear this sort of thing all the time, but thank you for coming. Now, Todd, tell me, do you know this guy, Matt Moneymaker, and this search that's going on in the UP?
No, I do not. I really have nothing to do with that. I'm actually more, I don't know how to say it in any other way than I've advanced to the point where I can track these animals repeatedly. I mean, I don't have audio tapes and that kind of stuff because I've never really heard any audio recordings of the animals. I always support any hypothesis of the species that would allow it to remain absolutely, untouched and away from human beings. And what's strange about what a lot of the Bigfoot research people do is they seem to have exceptional success. They almost go out every time and always have success. And dealing with hunters, I mean, hunters, they go out and they hunt white-tailed buck deers, and they'll go out, 100 times and maybe have success once. So, I mean, whatever they're doing, it's far more successful than me. What I'm doing is I need to find a new domicile. I'm the guy that has the repeatability in the videos. I've shot 2 pieces of Bigfoot videos on 2 separate occasions. And what's significant about especially one of the videos, every time you watch a Bigfoot video, it's either a man in a suit or it's a new species of primate, because no other species on the earth can walk bipedally. And in both my videos, you can see the animal. Well, in the video 3 that I have, the animal moves entirely bipedally. And I was able to remove the ability or the probability of it being a man in a suit because I had a kineticist analyze the video, and he said that animal ran that trek faster than the fastest man on the planet could. So if it's not a human being in a suit, what is it? And it is a new species of primate, and my team and I repeatedly can do this. We don't go out into the woods with a camera and go, boom, there's Bigfoot. It's a huge amount of planning. You have to be very strategic about what you're doing. From my knowledge, and again, my specific knowledge is it's Gigantopithecus is the species that we're studying, and it's about Rocky Mountain Gigantopithecus. It goes all the way back into, just like you were talking, the Chinese people, which have the last known Gigantopithecus domicile, which is a couple 100,000 years old, where they found teeth and whatnot. It's way up in a mountain, and that's what I'm studying is Rocky Mountain Bigfoot. So just so I can understand, and I appreciate your diplomatic language, but it seems to me, if I'm going to get to the bottom line on this, you're suspicious of anybody who claims to have an audio tape like that. Well, no, I mean, I don't know what's real or what's not. I've never heard. There's been a lot of Bigfoot recordings and whatnot, and I'm not suspicious of anybody. I just try to. And really, what's the point of that? It's not really something that's anybody could make an audio recording. I have an audio recording, actually, that I had from years ago, and it's not evidence. All the audio recording did to me, or did for me, is it brought other people that said, hey, that's a real Bigfoot sound, and I've heard that sound, and people came to me and said, well, I know that was a Bigfoot, and I'll show you why, and then I started getting chronicles together, and I started talking with other people that recognized that sound, but it's not real evidence. Even video evidence is not real evidence because, like with the Patterson film, it could be a man in a suit.
Right.
Except with my video 3 because my animal runs faster than the fastest man on the planet. But I'll be the first one to step forward and say video evidence will never be enough. And actually, my advancements have gone so far, there's so much scientific repeatability in what I do that if I made my knowledge public, anybody could get within 40 yards of these animals. And I have to get now species protection, which is my primary focus, what I talked about with Art Bell last time, is I'm working on species protection here in Canada where I live, And I'm next going to the United States. I'm going to begin my petition there to get species protection for them again, because I've made the discovery, and I can repeatedly do this again, and I will do this again. Next time, on my next expedition, what I actually have to have is I'm going to take a skeptical anthropologist with me, a person who does not believe in Bigfoot, and I've been on the BBC, and I'm going to get a big-name guy from the BBC who absolutely thinks Bigfoot is not true whatsoever, and I'll take them, and I'll show them what I've seen, and I'll come back with new video evidence and new DNA evidence. And, hopefully with these big-name people believing in what they've seen and what I've showed them, that at that point, if I haven't got species protection for these animals, I will. And once there's species protection, the next step is species recognition. And once I have all that, I can train forestry officers to do what I do and get within, distance of the animals and to learn how to study them, and the proper scientific, ethical study of the species can begin. Because my team and I will never kill one of these animals.
Right.
It's not only, that's something that I talked about with Art Bell last time, not only something that we won't do, it's something that you shouldn't do. Because if you go out there, these animals survive and evade in communities. That's how they stand together. We've actually figured out how they survive in the mountains. They're nocturnal animals. Most Bigfoot researchers agree on that. So what they do in the mountains, they strategically place themselves, they triangulate themselves in 3 spots, where if they see people coming, they simply back away. And they have the high point. They have the strategic advantage by being up somewhere in the mountain. It's precisely the same species that the Chinese people discovered in their domicile that I'm actually working with right now. 100,000-year-old Gigantopithecus DNA, teeth. And that's something else I'd like to do, is I'd like to map the genome of Gigantopithecus. There's so much information that I have for you right now, it's kind of hard to know where exactly to start.
Well, let me ask you a question, because I just want to make sure I understood, because I thought you made an interesting point about hunters. You said, they can go out 100 times and only catch one white-tailed deer, yet they always seem to go out and find what they want with a Bigfoot. But then it seemed to me that you said you can get us at any time within 40 feet of a Bigfoot at any time. So somewhere along the line, you figured out a pretty high success rate. You've got enough information that you can get close enough to these guys pretty much on demand?
Well, no, that's not true. I mean, what I'm saying is if I take somebody out on an expedition and I have them for, let's say, a month, in a month, I could get them within 40 yards.
Oh, I see. Okay, so within a month you can do it.
And a lot of work. I mean, for God's
sure. No, I get that. No, I totally get that distinction. No, a month. No, I totally get that. So when you talk about species protection, tell me a little bit more about what you've been able to do in Canada that you'd like to see in the United States.
Well, I have a documentary film of the reality of the species, a lot of significant information that I have. I took it and toured it around a little bit, and everywhere I took it, basically about 90% of the people that showed up to watch my film signed my petition. I was able to gather thousands of signatures. I sent it off to the House of Commons. It was certified as a legal document, and then I received a response. Obviously, it wasn't passed, and I didn't expect it to be passed the first time, because they're not really going to take you seriously. They're going to think it's about unicorns and Loch Ness, and I don't know that unicorns or Loch Ness aren't real. I'm not chastising people who believe in that stuff, but this is a real species. It's a Gigantopithecus. It's a real animal. And when I take scientists even on the tour, even of what's basic knowledge out there, people start to begin to understand that there's at least an exceptional possibility that these animals exist.
Right.
And that's what I'm working for. Even a big reason I'm in the coast to coast thing is, Art sprung it on me last time, the whole bugs issue, and the whole he has a body somewhere, and I was hoping to have a show again. I know Art's retired and whatnot, and I sort of missed it. Last time I talked to, I was on Coast to Coast, it was April, and I didn't know Art was going to retire right away. I went and we comprised an actual movie that we made, or a DVD, a 20-minute film for bugs, and we sent him a letter, and we were hoping to pursue that. A lot of people, the Coast to Coast fans that know about the bugs issue, my team and I seriously pursued it. We began a scientific investigation of everything Bug says, and I had questions for him and all sorts of things, even a breakdown of his situation of how he got near the most elusive animal on the planet.
Well, Todd Standing, I look forward to seeing a copy of the bugs video that you shot. I'd love to see and hear more about that. So we'll have to do another show on this coming up shortly. Have you ever aired the audio tape that you have of what you think might be a Bigfoot?
Yeah, absolutely. I actually had it on my website initially. The problem with it, it's actually video one, and it's not even on my website anymore. What happened was initially the videographer who was there that shot that video, he took it and sold it off and made a profit on it. And also by doing that, I believe he augmented the sound and whatnot. The sound is still the original sound, but what he did was he just took it and did some adjustments to it. And,
right.
Of course, now that that's happened, I can't be affiliated with it because everything I do is raw. there can be no disputing. That it's just raw evidence. But it did again. It brought people that are aware of encounters that they've had with this species and didn't even know it was Bigfoot. They said, "Hey, whatever you saw, I saw because I heard that same sound."
Let me ask you.
Compared to a chainsaw sound, I guess they said so.
Well, I want to ask you: have you? Because I think it would be interesting. Because I think there would be zoologists out there that might specialize in animal calls, and I wonder whether that tape has ever been run by them so that they could at least hear it and say, well, that sounds like an X or a Y or a Z, but that if they say, I've never heard that before, that might bolster the claim that it is in fact Bigfoot.
Yeah, well, actually, I have a team, and one of my team is a biologist, and he took it around, and he recognized the sound immediately because he had an encounter of his own, and it's been passed around. We've done our due diligence, and it's really, again, what you come to realize is it's just not enough evidence. We're looking for real concrete evidence, which in the end will have to be, a body. That's what just has to happen.
Oh, yeah.
And these animals aren't immortal. They live and die. It's just going to take time to ethically do that because you can't go out and execute one of them. A primate species that survives together and stands together, defends itself together. When you ask Diane Fossey what she was so upset about were baby gorillas being put in zoos because she knew 14 gorillas would die defending that baby gorilla. And what I'm concerned about is if somebody does go out there and executes one of these animals, they're not like bears. They don't live solitary existence. They stand together. They survive together. All the chronicles out there, things like Ape Canyon and research that I've done myself, shows that this species is devoted to each other and they stand together. So if you go out there and you kill one, you may have to, if you want to claim that body and bring it back, you may have to wipe out the whole troop of these animals. Right. And if that's the last existing troop, you've proved Bigfoot exists. Congratulations, you may have just wiped out the species as well. Well, stuff like that we're fighting against.
Anthropologically speaking, the Bigfoot as you see them in the genetics of it all, that they fall more into the family of man than they would say into the family of ape. That they're more hominid than they would be animal.
Actually, the species is scientifically classified already. It's called Gigantopithecus.
Right. I'm just asking. I know that, and I've seen the special on that on the History Channel and everything. I'm just asking you to define for people that don't know. Does that puts it more into the hominid family of man category? Correct.
Actually, they classify it with orangutans, but the truth is there's so little known about it. Like they don't even know if it was bipedal. Even the animal that existed for certain a few 100,000 years ago, all they have is teeth and a lower jawbone. When people come and ask me why have there never been bones found, well, the answer is I don't really know. But whatever the reason is, this species has existed for 6 million years, and we've never found anything but teeth. So whatever the answer for it is, we know this species existed for at least 5.9 million years, and we never found anything other than a lower jawbone and lower jawbone teeth. So we need so much more information. We even need a frontal view of Bigfoot. We need a better, a real high-definition look at the species because we can extrapolate so much evidence from that, even how big their eyes are, whether they have a point on the top of their head, how their jaw is, even what kind of teeth that they show, how big their nose is, whether their face is flat or not. There's so much information that primatologists can extrapolate from a really clear-cut frontal view. And I don't know, the Patterson film, there's so much controversy involving it, but if you want to take that as a view, it's and just even what eyewitness accounts are. And there are tremendous eyewitness accounts out there. We're talking doctors, police, judges, lawyers. A president of the United States, Teddy Roosevelt, believed this species was an absolute reality. So there are people out there with enormous credentials that believe this species is absolutely real.
I get that, but again, I want to go back to this because I think when you're talking about protection, if it's viewed as more hominid, right, than and I know humans are animals, but I just mean if it's seen more in the family of man than say in the family of apes as a pure primate, wouldn't it make sense to really push for maybe like human rights protection?
Absolutely. Well,
as opposed to like an animal species sort of, protection.
Yeah, well, actually, that would be discussed. What you're talking about, and primatologists battle over this every day. It's called the theory of mind.
Right.
Basically, human beings will take gorillas out of zoos and everything if we can prove that they have the intelligence of something more than a 4-year-old, that they can prove that they have consciousness, and they have there are certain criteria that you have to meet for theory of mind. And we hope to prove that with Bigfoot, even before as it's scientifically classified, because, right now I don't have enough evidence to prove. They're very evasive and they do all these incredible things as I see them, but there are birds out there that do things that look very incredible, and they're just running on instincts. Little spiders make these intricately, amazingly designed civil engineering marvels like bees do, but they're not intelligent. They don't qualify for the theory of mind. So it's really going to take a lot of research and a lot of time to bring that about. And that's just something we're very prepared to do. But it's really going to take a lot of time, a lot of research. It's going to be a lot of work. And as you can imagine, there's no funding for Bigfoot studies right now.
Right.
So,
I'm fascinated by the theory of mind, and I actually want to do a whole show on that coming up, because the effort to try to give apes human rights is quite a compelling claim, and it's being made by several well-known legal minds who say, well, look, under all of these criteria that we would apply to humans also apply to apes. I think that's fascinating, but I just think it might be easier in a way. Also, if you started doing it on a state-by-state basis, if you didn't go national, if you went to Washington State and you said, look, can we just get human rights protection theoretically that you cannot, if you knew that you were shooting a Bigfoot, that you cannot murder a Bigfoot any more than you could just shoot a human being in the woods?
Mm-hmm. And there is species protection in Skamania, Washington, and I always knew coming to the United States, it's going to be a lot easier than it is in Canada to get species protection, because in the U.S. they're so, like I say, there's already species protection for them. What I need to do, what I'm going to work on right now, probably the easiest route, and that's really what I'm going to go for right now, because when it comes to politics and laws, I really don't want to go there. But the easiest route is, honestly, if you don't have a tag to shoot an animal, if you don't have, you can't go and kill a bear any time of the year. You have to have a tag to do that. So if there's any unknown species out there that you can't identify, you shouldn't be shooting at it. And that's why I get even support from forestry officers. They say, if Bigfoot doesn't, they say Bigfoot doesn't exist. That's the official opinion. The species is not real if you go talk to a forestry officer. That's the official position. So if you're shooting at something, if you think it's a bear and you're assuming it's Bigfoot, you have no right to shoot at it. If it's a man in a suit, you have no right to kill him. It's murder. If you're hallucinating and you see a tree stump or you think a moose is Bigfoot, you have no right to shoot it. So under no circumstances do you have the right to shoot this animal. And if it is a real species, it's not classified, and legally you have no right to be shooting that because it's an unclassified species, and you don't have the right to do that until it's
classified and tagged and the whole bit, right?
And,
very interesting.
And studied and the whole thing, and that's actually where our premise is going to begin, just based on that. Once there's that protection for them, once it's absolutely legal and there's fines, and even more importantly, forestry officers will come and help us, because you were talking about earlier the 2 video things. I'll tell you, we went out there, and that was the only reason we went out there, was to get something repeatable. We had a forestry officer with 20 years experience tranquilizing big animals. He told us, and this is not public at all, we never told anybody. We're keeping all of our research quiet, because we know what happens when people discover a Bigfoot domicile. People infiltrate the region, and all sorts of bad stuff happen. Men with guns show up.
Wait, hold on a second. Has that happened in the past?
Oh, absolutely.
Where men with guns have shown up at a Bigfoot domicile?
Why wouldn't you?
I'm just asking, what happened then? If it happened in the past and men have showed up with guns in a Bigfoot domicile, what happened that we don't end up with a dead Bigfoot?
Because they don't know enough about the species to get anywhere near them, and what happens is the animals move away.
Okay.
They just have you have no idea how elusive these animals are. Their evasive techniques are beyond what you could do, what any hunter could get near, especially because you don't know anything about the animals. And when people come in with guns, the animals just move away. They lose their habitat. And that's probably the worst of it, is we're aware of now 3 deserted domiciles, and my biggest concern is, how are these animals even going to survive? They have no tolerance for human habitation whatsoever. They have no tolerance for a human presence. Initially, we were going to try to find a new domicile close to a national park area, because you can't shoot any animals, you can't hunt in a national park area, so there's automatic protection already. The problem is they have no tolerance for human habitation whatsoever. If people are hiking in the area, they will move away. They will stay away from humans at every chance they get. That's what makes them the most evasive animals on the planet. And, that's why we need to ensure that when we look for a new domicile, that it doesn't become compromised, that we don't make the same mistakes that we have done before, because we had a domicile. We were out there when we shot pieces of Bigfoot evidence. We were studying the species. We were becoming illuminated to all the things they do to survive and live, and we lost it because men with guns show up. And fortunately for us, they will never get near the species.
Why is it different for you to show up with cameras than men to show up with guns if their reaction to any human presence is to run away and evacuate their domicile?
Because we knew precisely, most importantly, we knew exactly where the day watchers were. This is when they're most vulnerable, is when the main group is sleeping and the day watchers are about. So if you know precisely where a day watcher is that nobody else knows, and that's what we look for in a Bigfoot domicile. We look for the signs that a day watcher leaves behind. That's what I don't make public. But when we know precisely where, we use global positioning satellites to go, okay, we took topographical views. This is exactly the layout. This is exactly the terrain. This is precisely where the day watchers were. So we had a counter strategy knowing everything that we knew about the animals, and even with that, we were mostly unsuccessful. We had to use other advantages, like there was a river there, and we had to use the terrain to our advantage. We had to evade any type of sensory perception they may have, because they're doing exceptional things. For some reason, one of the first times we ever went out there, and we saw one of these animals, we're looking through binoculars miles away. As soon as we pop our head over the ridge and look with the binoculars, the animal leaves. How could it possibly have been aware of us? It's alerted to our presence immediately. So we go away and we have to do more research and, increase our understanding, create what we call a Gigantopithecus cloaking device of sorts, and utilize that and try that, and that was effective for us the next time we were, we went out on our expedition. And again, we took those 2 pieces of video evidence to a forestry officer and said, look, we repeatedly got within 40 yards of these animals. You have a tranq gun, you're a tranq gun expert, you can use that. Could you tranquilize one of these animals? And fortunately for us, we lost our research site before we could tranquilize one of these animals, because something that people have to understand, if you ever try to tranq them, incapacitate them, or provoke them in any way, they defend themselves. And there's a group of them. You have to remember, these animals don't leave their own behind, just like most other primate species do. Chimpanzees, human beings, obviously, gorillas are like that. So if you go out there, and I didn't take the advice of the First Nations people at the time, but if you go out there and you try to harm one of these animals or even tranq them, they're not going to understand, hey, I just tranquilized your buddy, he's perfectly fine. They're going to come back and defend themselves, and you're not going to be able to tranquilize the rest of the group. They're going to violently defend themselves, like every species has a right to. And I don't want to be there when that happens.
So you were pro or con tranquilizing one?
I would never attempt to tranquilize one again.
Okay, you not again?
No, never. I actually never did get the opportunity to do that. Luckily for me, I'd lost my research site at that time, and I would never try to attempt that again at all. It was a foolish thing to do. I wasn't listening to wisdom of people that knew, and just think about the consequences of it. I know there's a group there. I'm very well aware there's more than one animal there. There's several, probably at least I would say a minimum of 10.
Okay.
I know this species is devoted to each other, and they stand together at all costs. There's been 100 chronicles that will substantiate that, famous ones like Ape Canyon and Ruby Creek and stuff like that. So knowing that, I still went out there to tranquilize one of these animals, thinking, I'm not going to hurt them, I'm still being a good guy, my intent is good, but they will not understand that. Of course they won't. You tell it to a grizzly bear. If you go out there, that's what the First Nations people use as an explanation. You go out and tranquilize a cub, what are you going to do when mom comes back? Except this isn't going to be one mom, this is going to be a whole group of them. And they'll violently defend themselves. And these primates, Gigantopithecus, they're enormous. They're huge animals, 3 times the size of a gorilla, probably 3 times as strong. And I don't want to be there when these animals come back to defend themselves. I don't even want to put myself in that position. I'm afraid for anybody else who goes out and tries to do that, tries to throw a net over one. I don't want to be there for that, because you don't have to worry about the guy you incapacitated. You have to worry about a primate species that is exceptionally familiar with its area, was born and raised there, and it's going to do everything it can to defend himself. And it would be a terrifying situation. I don't want to ever have that transpire. So,
if they're so afraid of humans, why? How do you view those people who say that they have been attacked by a Bigfoot? I mean, for just doing nothing more than camping or walking through the woods.
Well, it's one interesting thing about primates is people talk about the rut. The main reason most people are successful hunting white-tailed bucks is because we have knowledge of a rut. It's at a certain time of year. Primates don't have ruts. They just like every species of primate, always females just have their monthly cycles.
Right.
So if there was a time when these animals, a particular time of the month, where males were competing with each other, or they were just being aggressive and assertive, like male primates do when it's that time of the month, there's a female in heat, they might possibly become aggressive during those times. Or it could be that they're rearing a youth, or they've even misplaced a youth, and they're just being defensive in the area. There's so many reasons for it that when you just break it down, I mean, the possibilities of it are just a reality. That's
right. I was just trying to reconcile the ultra-elusive, ultra-reclusive description with those people who have just kind of come across them along the same path. Let me ask you about the, I'm going to go back to this again because I'm sort of curious about this audio tape from the UP, and I haven't heard it yet. I don't know that it's been released yet, but it would be interesting to have that to compare to another audio tape of a Bigfoot that you endorse. I mean, one that you've heard that you go, well, this one has already been, at least, for a period of time, stood up to scholastic scrutiny. So is there, I mean, that's what I'd like to, almost like to hear that tape from the UP and see whether it sounds like the other tapes of known Bigfoot appearances.
Yeah, it would be very. I keep my mind open. That's what's made me successful. Is I always listen, and I really try to keep an open mind with everything I hear and explore all the possibilities of it. And it would be, you know what? If I heard that they had a tape of one of these animals, I would immediately contact them, and I would immediately bring to their attention, if they haven't heard about me already, just all the ramifications involved when you start taking on the species and when you start, provoking them or doing things with them. I don't want anybody to get hurt, especially because you know what will happen if a human being is publicly killed by one of these species. We'll go out and we'll try to execute the species, and we don't care what the circumstances are of it. It's basically an all-out war. If some, like an example of somebody going into a national park and they take fish burgers and put it around their kid so it attracts the bear to the kid, and then it's ridiculous. The guy takes the photograph and the bear attacks his son, and then the bear gets killed after.
Right.
That was just an absolute ridiculous situation.
Yeah,
nobody stuff like that.
Nobody would want that. But would it? I mean, in your heart of hearts, I mean, wouldn't there be, if you could, under whatever circumstances, come across a Bigfoot carcass, whether it was from a hunter, whether it was from something else, wouldn't that be, in a way, I mean, as tragic as the circumstances might have be, in the great sort of timeline of intellectual history, wouldn't that be kind of this aha moment that you've been arguing for a very long time? Wouldn't it come as sort of a relief for you to be able to go, there, now what's the next level? The next level is protection. I mean, wouldn't it finally give you the impetus to really be able to move the needle on the kind of protection you're talking about?
Absolutely. And that's why I decided, my team and I decided to really pursue the bugs issue again, because I believe that happened. And, if Bug's story really did transpire, then, it's time for us to take advantage of that atrocious situation to ensure that never happens again. My focus is always to ensure and educate that kind of ignorance doesn't transpire again, that we find the compromise between species and, just ensure that nobody has to go out. I know of situations, I'm chronicling things right now, hugely substantiated confrontations where people have lost their lives to this species, and, it's just out of ignorance. Somebody goes out and tries to shoot them, and, they lose their life. And I'll have all these things. And
we'll have that, next time we have you on, you'll have details on, like, the name of a person somewhere that was killed by a Bigfoot. I'm reading this book, A Special Mission, Hitler's Secret Plot to Seize the Vatican and Kidnap Pope Pius XII, and all I can tell you is you don't want to miss this. I'll have to screw this show up in order for it not to be an amazing interview with Dan Kurzman next on Coast to Coast AM. This is Ian Punnett. A Special Mission, Hitler's Secret Plot to Seize the Vatican and Kidnap Pope Pius XII will challenge everything you ever thought you knew about Himmler. It will challenge perhaps the popular conception of the anti-Semitism of Pope Pius XII, and it will definitely expand what you will understand about the secret life of Nazis, because as I was reading, it was both cracking me up and freaking me out as I was going through the book, A Special Mission. Hey, Dan Kurzman.
I'm delighted to be with you.
How about that for an introduction? Now, you won't know me from, like, anybody, right? But let me just tell you, I've been reading your books for a long time, and I have one goal tonight, and that is at the end of the interview, you will call Milt Rosenberg and tell him you've just had the best interview ever, and it wasn't from him. Okay? I just want you to do that to my old friend Milt Rosenberg. He's a very nice man.
Great.
And I've loved your stuff since Fatal Voyage. The definitive book about the USS Indianapolis. Now, is it coincidence that they just had a special on about the fate of the crewmen of the Indianapolis? Was that based on your book that they just did? I think it was on the Discovery Channel or something.
Well, I don't know, because I've done a number of different, interviews for various stations, and I'm not sure. I didn't know about this one. They keep replaying it because the book was written quite a while ago.
Well, and I will tell you too, I was also really fond of your book on the USS Juno, the book Left to Die, and the tragedy related to the Sullivan brothers and the other things that happened on that ship. Yes. And I was surprised that even in your list of books on the back of A Special Mission, there's nothing about Left to Die on there.
Well, I've done this is my 17th book, The Special Mission is, and so I guess they couldn't fit everything.
Got to leave off something.
Book, but they put out about 8 of my 17. They have a slight small review of each book. But
well, Left to Die is great, and Left to Die sort of changed my life in a way. When I read it, it's been haunting me ever since I read it.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, you've made my day, my night, and my week, and my month.
Well, I'm glad. But in a way, you kind of ruined a few nights of mine because I had so many nightmares about that particular experience, both of the Indianapolis, but that was a story I knew a little bit better than the fate of the USS Juneau, and that just, I don't know, it really got under my skin.
Well, yeah, I hope I didn't bother you too much with that problem. But, this is about the 5 Sullivan brothers, and the story, that happened to them, all 5 brothers going down together was a story I thought that should be told in detail.
But also the
opportunity to do it.
The other men that went into the water with him. I mean, that was the part that was, you tell your stories beautifully, and you do it again here in a special mission, Hitler's secret plot to seize the Vatican and kidnap Pope Pius XII. Dan, I just have to tell you, having read several of your other books, this one seemed, and maybe I'm wrong on this, a little more personal than some of the other books.
Well, I'm not sure that's so, because what I try to do is when I write a book is to really get to know the people involved, and like with you mentioned, A Fatal Voyage, and I did another one, Genesis 1948, the first Arab-Israeli War, and I got to know so many people there just by interviewing them on what happened in one of the most incredible wars in history, and so in each book I try to get to know the people to the extent that it's possible, because a lot of them, by the time I write the book, they're no longer living, but to the extent possible, I interview people and try to write history in such a way that the reader is actually living it as they read it, because my favorite subject when I was a student in high school and college was history, but somehow history, which can be so fascinating, is written often, in fact mostly, in a very conventional way, and you're in school, you study it, and as soon as the midterm is over, you forget what you've read. So I try to write in such a way that people, after they read the history, they'll keep it in their minds and remember it, and won't have to struggle to think about dates and so forth.
Well, that's how well you wrote the story of Left to Die, that it was history that definitely stayed with me. I guess in this case I was sort of thinking of the number of times you've already referred to yourself in the first person in the story as you're talking about these interviews, and I thought that was very interesting, although you may have done that as often in other books, and it just didn't hit me the same way.
Right. Well, I tried to get to... I met most of the people who were involved in this plot, Hitler's plot to take over the Vatican, even kill the Pope. And I interviewed most of the people who were one way or another involved. And so in that sense, you had to get to know them to be able to judge whether, what they're saying and use their material one against the other to make sure that's correct.
Well, and you got to know the sort of the main character in the story, this SS General Wolf. Tell me about finding him and working with him in the context both as an interviewer but also as a storyteller, because there are several times where it seems like as somebody gives his personal narrative of the events, he's perfectly willing to kind of give a softer version of his life as a Nazi general.
Well, I first, I didn't know anything about him, but I was with the Washington Post at the time as a correspondent, and I read about this SS General Karl Wolf, who had just been released from prison, where he was convicted. He was convicted as a war criminal. As a matter of fact, he was really quite a war criminal, because he was the chief of staff to, of all people, Heinrich Himmler, the orchestrator of the Holocaust. So I read that he was being released because he had heart problem or something, and so I rushed to his hometown, Darmstadt, in Germany, and I went into a phone booth and phoned him up, because I wasn't even sure he'd been there, whether he moved or anything, but I did find his name, in the phone book his family name, and so I called up and I spoke with him and I told him that I'd like to interview him, and he said, I don't speak with journalists. So I thought, well, I guess that's the end of that. But then I continued to bother him about, told him, look, I want to tell your side of the story. You've been in prison for a long time. People should know, your arguments, I think it'd be better for you for the future. And anyway, I finally talked him into seeing me. So I had it, but he said, you got to be over in about 20 minutes. So I grabbed a student who knew English quite well, because this was in Germany, but he knew English quite well, and I hired him immediately and took a taxi over to see him. And he said he would see me for about 20 minutes, but it ended up with about 5 or 6 hours. And he told me these really fantastic stories, which I'd never heard before. And one of the main stories was, the main story was, that about how Hitler had given him an order. He called him in one day, about 3 days after Rome, after the Nazi troops went into Rome. They went into Rome after Mussolini was overthrown, and by some dissidents in Italy, and Hitler was furious, so he sent his troops into Rome. And about 3 days after, he called Wolf into his office and says, Wolf, I have a special mission for you. That's why I call my book A Special Mission. And he says, I want you to go into the Vatican, take over everything, all the literature and the treasures and the books and all these cumulative things that have been accumulating over the centuries, and take all that, and then I want you to kidnap the Pope and take him either to Germany or to Liechtenstein. We'll decide later, where he's going to go, but I want this done immediately. And Wolf, who was more of an opportunist than he was an ideologist, he was hoping that eventually he'd replace Hitler as the Führer, and so he got this job with Himmler, and Himmler liked him, and so his job, when he worked for Himmler, was to make sure that the boxcars full of Jews got to their death camps in time, and he kept tab on how many were in each boxcar and so forth. And in any event.
Yeah, and let me just stop you here, because there's like two threads running at once there, and I think that both of them are really interesting. So I want to go back to his life with Himmler, because I thought what you report in the book was so compelling. His insights into Heinrich Himmler were so fascinating, and things I had never seen anywhere else, from his own personal accounts of being Heinrich Himmler's fair-haired boy, in the way in which he helped Himmler pull off the Holocaust, while at the same time Wolf himself claimed that he had no knowledge of what was going on. And I want to go back to that, because that's so interesting. But let's pick up, just if I can push back a little bit on the idea that, and I think a lot of people realize that Mussolini was out of power by about 1943, and it was at that time Hitler realized that these Italian troops were not going to be able to hold off the invading Allies. And can you talk a little bit about how the King of Italy, after having been reinstalled after Mussolini was thrown out, actually tried to join the Allies and leave the axis of Japan and Germany behind? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes. The enemy, he had Mussolini had a lot of internal enemies, and other fascists who didn't like him, and they overthrew him and took him and hid him away. And Hitler was furious, because, as you know, Hitler was a very strong ally of Mussolini. The two were like twins in a way, and so he was furious, and that's when Hitler sent his troops into Rome. Mussolini was overthrown on the 25th of July, 1943, and about 6 weeks later, in September 1943, Hitler sent in his troops into Rome, and of course the idea was not simply to take over as much of Rome as possible before the Allies could get there, or of Italy as possible, but to be right on the border of the Vatican City, where he would be able to go into the Vatican. So the king, meanwhile, after the coup, he escaped from Rome and went joined the Allies, and so that of course really made Hitler angry, and Hitler blamed the Pope more than anybody else for this, because he knew that the Pope and Mussolini weren't getting along very well, and so that helped to push him into this idea of let's take the Pope right now, and
sure,
while we can, see, once you're in Rome, you're right there, right where where you can do it. Before that, he wanted to do it, but it was difficult because he wasn't on the border of the Vatican City, and he couldn't get Mussolini to agree to take over,
take over the Vatican,
and himself,
take all their stuff. Yeah, and so Hitler reaches out to this guy, a very trusted, sort of perfect Aryan specimen, General Karl Wolff, and says, that you have to go on this special mission for me, and we'll get back to that. Tell me a little bit more though about Wolff himself. When you sat down with him, and you're talking to him, and you're in Darmstadt, Germany. He's gotten out of prison after all of these years. You've got this translator there working with you. What were your impressions of him as a man, as a truth teller?
Well, of course he lied to me when he said that. When I asked him about his role in the Holocaust, he says I was under order. He said he was under orders from Himmler and Hitler, and if he had not obeyed orders, they'd have killed him, and that he did not know that the Jews were being sent to the death camps. All he knew was that they were sent to concentration camps. He says he didn't want to do it, but he had to do it. But he said he had no idea about them being killed until after the war, when he read it in the newspapers, which of course wasn't true. And he had, of course, this was argument to try to save himself from Auschwitz, from Nuremberg.
Right.
He would have been put on trial. After all, he was the second man in the SS to Himmler.
Right.
And so he would have been a good candidate for hanging. And so when Wolff heard, was given this order by Hitler to take over the Vatican and kidnap the Pope, he decided that it was in his best interest not to do so, but to sabotage this idea, because then maybe he could win the Pope's gratitude, and after the war, the Pope would put in a good word for him and save him from the noose.
Well, that part was really interesting. That here it was 1943, 2 years before the war would end, and already both this guy, General Wolff, and even Heinrich Himmler had already seen the writing on the wall. They were already thinking of an exit strategy that would save them from, being held responsible for the horrible crimes they know they'd already committed, and they were already looking for a door.
They absolutely were. As a matter of fact, just about at the time of the invasion of Rome by the Nazis, Himmler himself was talking secretly with some officers, in the army, some army officers who were anti-Hitler and were plotting to overthrow Hitler. And on the one hand, Himmler felt obligated to carry out his, Hitler's mission, which is really to kill all the Jews that he could. And on the other hand, he was dealing secretly with many of these German resistance officers, together with Wolff, I might say. They were like twins. And so Wolff, in any event, felt that he could save himself by winning the Pope's gratitude, and so he was right after Rome was taken. Wolff was sent over to Rome, to Italy, and to be the more or less the guide or the the nanny, so to speak, of Mussolini, because Mussolini had been taken away by the dissenters, who threw him out of office, and the Germans, as soon as they came into Rome, they managed to find where Mussolini was being hidden, and they
freed him.
Liberated him, so to speak,
right.
And they sent him up to northern Italy, where he established, with Nazi help, northern Italy as a separate area in which he would still be the top guy. And Wolf was sent over there to make sure that Mussolini obeyed Nazi orders. But there was together with that, with that particular mission to make sure Mussolini obeyed Nazi orders, he was given the order to take over the Vatican at the same time, since he was going to be in Rome.
The special mission, Hitler's secret plot to seize the Vatican and kidnap Pope Pius XII. I don't know about you, but it's really hard with me to come up with secret information about World War II yet. I learned a ton in this, and about people that I really, kind of despise, like Heinrich Himmler. However, there's an interesting side to Himmler that we learned from this book, and Dan Kurzman learned from this SS General Karl Wolff, who personally sabotaged Hitler's special mission, even though he himself wasn't Catholic. And we'll get into that coming up in just a second, why he sabotaged the plan to kidnap the Pope, and what the Pope was actually doing at the time, which might change the way that history judges him. Next on Coast to Coast AM, this is Ian Punnett. Dan Kurzman was telling us about how he got to know about the secret plot to kidnap the Pope and to seize the Vatican and loot its treasures from the SS General Karl Wolff when he was finally let out of prison. What year was that you interviewed him, Dan, originally when you were working?
1974, just after he came out of prison, just days after he got out.
It took you a few decades to write this book.
Well, I went through the... before I do this, because it's a very delicate, question, and I didn't want to put anything in that I couldn't confirm. So it took, I was doing many books in between, and I continually looked for people who were involved somehow in the plot and who knew Wolf, and I finally put the whole thing together.
No, it's fascinating, and I just got my copy of it this morning, and I've been reading voraciously all day with it. Let me go back a little bit to that time when you first met with him.
Right.
Up until that point, had you ever heard about this secret plot to seize the Vatican?
I never had, and I don't think anybody else had either.
No, and it really is amazing that this hasn't gotten more historical vetting for as big a plot as it is.
That's true. It is surprising, but I went. I checked with so many people that to make sure that that what he said about the plot was accurate, and from all the interviews I had, I became convinced that it was. For example, I interviewed. Some of the people I interviewed, they included Rudolf Rahn, who was the German ambassador to Mussolini's rump state, up there in northern Italy. And then, after the Duce was ousted from Rome.
He created this fascist state in the northern part of Italy.
Right, yeah.
After that, right.
Where Hitler set him up in northern Italy to... after he was thrown out, and the Germans occupied parts of Italy, the parts where they occupied, they put in Mussolini as the top guy there. So he had limited power in that area. And I interviewed Eitel Mulhausen, who was Rahn's deputy in Rome, and Albrecht von Kessel, who was the deputy to Ernst von Weizsäcker, who was the German ambassador to the Vatican, and SS Colonel Eugene Dahlmann, who was Wolff's liaison with Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, the supreme military commander in Italy. These were very, very important and influential top Nazis. And So in addition to these people who were involved and knew about the plot, and I checked one against the other to see whether they contradicted each other. And then I also then went to the Vatican, and I spoke with among other people to Father Peter Gumpel, who is the Vatican's chief investigator of Pius's career, Pope Pius's career, to determine if he should be beatified, which of course is the first step toward toward sainthood.
Right.
And he had unlimited access to all the documents and oral testimony in the Vatican archives, and he told me that the evidence that Wolf gave me, or the evidence showed that what Wolf told me was true, and so I got it from quite a few sources, and I put the whole thing together, and I found that it wasn't just a minor little incident or a minor little plot. It was a plot that helped to determine the policies and the behavior of Hitler and his subordinates, as well as the Pope and his subordinates, and throughout that whole period, in which so this is an influence that has never really been covered in any history book.
It's amazing. Let me also say that, and I want to get to the specific plot here and how it was done in just a second, but I thought it was so intriguing was to hear this guy's reflections on Himmler himself, because, as you said, these guys were, at one time, they were very close. It was almost more of like a father-son relationship or some avuncular relationship with Wolf. But what was intriguing to me is you said this, and I guess I've always heard this, but I just liked how you phrased it. You were talking about how disliked Himmler was his whole life, and that as a schoolboy, even, like, he was picked on and sort of rejected by his classmates because he was a snitch. I thought that was great. That he was like he was always tattling on the other kids in the class. And I thought, well, no wonder he grew up to be, Himmler and head of the SS. He's working out all of these psychological issues from having been ostracized as a kid.
Yeah, he was trying to take it out on society, because he was... he felt like, he felt that he was being just, everybody hated him. He used to, as a matter of fact, he would report on other, when he was in school, he reported on other students who he thought were unruly and got them into trouble, and he was hated by everybody, and so he hated them back. That
makes like his work in the SS like a big giant Columbine.
Right. Well, that he had this. Of course, he was the organizer and the perpetrator of this terrible crime, perhaps the greatest crime in history. But the interesting thing is that he wasn't really so much the ideologist as he was desirous of replacing Hitler as the Führer. And of course, Wolf was his close friend, so Wolf felt that once Himmler became the Führer one day, that he would be next to the line. So they were both of them were very ambitious. It's interesting to read what Himmler's doctor. He had a Finnish doctor. And because this was a specialist in what was wrong with
Himmler's stomach and his
Himmler,
head.
Because Himmler had these terrible chronic headaches and stomach pain, and so he had this Dr. Felix Kirsten. This is what he said. This is what he quotes Himmler as telling him, because while he was giving him treatment, Kirsten, who the doctor would say, well, look, why do you have to kill all these people? I mean, how will you go down in history and so forth? He wanted to find out exactly what was wrong with him. And, of course, one of the interesting things is that the reason why he had these chronic pains was obviously his conscience. He was killing all these people, and he was the more he killed, the more painful his aches and pains were.
Right, and he may not have been as, I guess he was anti-Semitic, but he claims that he never wanted to kill them. He just wanted to send them out of the country.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, may I quote the doctor, what he said about him? He reports what Himmler told him. Kirsten, I never wanted to destroy the Jews. Extermination was a dirty business. But some years ago, the Fuhrer gave me orders to get rid of them. I made a start and even punished excesses committed by my people. But then, he saw which way the wind was blowing,
right?
And he decided that he was going to do what Hitler wanted him to do.
Well, as long as...
So Hitler ordered Himmler to arrange for the extermination of the Jews, and then I quote here in my book, and the SS chief, that of course was Himmler, could no longer resist the order if he wished to rise in the Nazi hierarchy. It didn't make sense to jeopardize his own future and possibly his neck to save people he despised anyway. Besides, he rationalized, there was a certain logic in the decision to kill them all. The Fuhrer demanded that Germany and all German-controlled areas had to be cleansed of Jews in order to ensure the purity and dominance of the Aryan race. But if no other country would take them, what option was left but genocide?
Right.
Try as he might, however, he could not rationalize his way out of his depression over Hitler's order. So, he decided that, it was just practical, the only practical thing he could do, because if he disobeyed, he'd never become Führer.
Right.
Basically, that's why he did it.
Yeah, and yet, too, he also used that justification later on to General Wolfe, saying, didn't the Americans kill all the Indians? Some old life has to make way for new life. So
that's right. He used that as if you say, well, listen, this is just pure politics. I mean,
look at the Americans.
When the Americans thought it was in their interest, they killed the Indians. He's trying to compare one with the other.
Well, as long as you're quoting that guy, Dr. Kirsten, I thought the most interesting thing that he reported on was the break between Wolfe and Himmler, and this will get us back into the story of Wolfe in just a second, but that Wolfe wanted to get a divorce from his wife and marry this new, very Aryan, hot, Countess babe. And Himmler wouldn't approve the divorce because he didn't approve of divorce, but he was able to get the approval directly from Hitler. And Himmler and Wolfe kind of broke over that. But I wanted to read the quote because I thought it was so interesting, because, as you say here in the book, that Himmler himself, Wolfe knew, was estranged from his wife, apparently because Hitler disapproved of her, and he was living with a mistress who had given birth to two children. The SS chief, who was almost as anti-Catholic as he was anti-Semitic, would say to Dr. Kirsten on marriage, it would be a natural development for us to break with monogamy. Marriage in its existing form is the Catholic Church's satanic achievement. Marriage laws are in themselves immoral. With bigamy, each wife would act as a stimulus to the other so that both would try to be their husband's dream woman. No more untidy hair, no more slovenliness. Their models, which will intensify these reflections, will be the ideals of beauty projected by art and the cinema. I think that's so interesting, coming from a murderous little troll like Himmler, that he wants wives to compete for his affections, and at the same time, he's against divorce, but he's for bigamy.
Yeah, that is very interesting, because he twisted this with ideological logic, and
right.
that it was immoral to divorce, but it was not immoral if you
had a girlfriend,
if you had a mistress, because right. Because the idea was to have more children who could then replace those who were killed in war, and so he had this Lebensraum, which he called this organization in which the people were encouraged to have more children, and then turn these children over to this Lebensraum, which would bring them up to be soldiers to replace those who were killed in war.
Well, and so it was that he was more than happy at that point to get rid of this guy Wolfe, and Wolfe, he sort of recommends him for this project, and Wolfe gets this special mission from Hitler. Hitler tells him in a very few words, but gives him a mission that says, this has got to be done now. I want you to go in and take care of Mussolini, as you said, and then at the same time, I want you to kidnap the Vatican Curia. I want you to kidnap the Pope, maybe kill the Curia, maybe even kill the Pope, but take all of their treasures and bring them back to me, and to do it now, to do it right away.
Right,
And
that was his order.
And even that moment, as you recount here, Wolf told you that even as he walked out of that meeting with Hitler, he thought to himself right away, there's no way I'm going to do this. Why? How could he look the other way for millions of Jews being murdered but draw the line at kidnapping the Pope?
Well, for one thing, when he, in his own mind, Wolf had an interesting, twisted mind. His job was to send people to, in boxcars to the death camps, but he didn't want to know. He really didn't want to know what happened to them once they arrived there. He actually persuaded himself, it seems, that they would just be there in the camps, and that he didn't want to know anything about what happened to them because he felt that why what does he have to know about what happened to them afterwards? Why bother himself? Why disturb himself? And so he deliberately tried to blind himself to what the ultimate with the ultimate purpose of these boxcars were. And so in this way he was able to rationalize that he wasn't such a bad guy after all. And I would say that he did try to help individual Jews escape when he could. And in fact, he was accused by some Nazis of having a Jewish girlfriend and all, and behind the scenes and all. And so, but it was convenient for him to just shut his eyes to the Holocaust and just not take notice of what happened to them afterwards. They were, before the Jews were put in these boxcars, there had been cattle put in these boxcars. They were sent to the slaughterhouse. So there was just a switch from the cattle to the Jews. Each of them went to a slaughterhouse. And he just thought of the Jews as just numbers. Let me see, how many to a boxcar? Just like prior, to this, he would have said how many cattle could fit into the boxcar. Mm. And so this was his general attitude.
Except when it came to the Pope.
But the thing is this: he was thinking. So he wasn't really thinking about the Jews being killed. What he was thinking about is saving his own neck. And when Hitler gave him this order, he saw the possibility of saving himself by winning the gratitude of the Pope by saving him. So, what he didn't tell me, incidentally, is that all the details that I learned later about what would happen, and to the in the Vatican, which I think he didn't really want to deal. He didn't want to deal with that too, because he didn't want to deliberately go through with such a crime, regardless of what he did to the Jews. This was just too much for him. And could I just tell you now what the plot was?
Well, I'll tell you what, why don't you, because we're coming up on the top of the hour, so let's just save that, because I'm afraid you would just get started and then we'd have to stop again anyway. So we'll come back to that in just a moment. And
it's an incredible story.
It is an incredible story, and it's actually a perfect time to stop, because what's so interesting about the things that you report from what Wolf talks about was, even as he walked out, you said he thought to himself, I can't let this happen. And he didn't mind the idea of going down in posterity as the guy who helped murder, hundreds of thousands, millions of Jews, but he didn't want history to know him as the guy who had kidnapped the Pope. And it wasn't because he was Catholic. He didn't suffer from that kind of Catholic guilt. What was it that drove him to think, I cannot let this plot go through?
What drove him basically was that that he didn't want to go down in history for posterity as the guy who got rid of the Pope.
But why?
Well, because he had a special feeling about power. That's one of the things that drew him to Hitler in the first place.
We've been talking with Dan Kurzman. We'll do it again here in just a second. He'll lay out the plot for you as was originally conceived by the SS General Karl Wolff, and then intentionally abandoned by him at the same time. We'll also go over a little bit of what some of the other exit strategies were that Himmler and he were developing, ways they thought they could get out of being held responsible for the Holocaust. And Himmler himself, I just got to recommend this book for, I mean, it's just, we talked last half hour about how Himmler had been the class tattletale, and that he was just disliked, and the more he was disliked, the more he would tattle on other people, and just being kind of a snitchy guy just always put him as sort of the, in the kind of the lower end of whatever class he was with. And he tried to join the army, they wouldn't have him, and until he rose to power with the Nazis, he was a guy who was just trying to find a way to be important. And it was just it just made me wonder through the whole thing, what would life have been like? What would the world have been like if Himmler had been a popular kid in third grade? What we might have avoided, how hard it might have been for Hitler to find somebody else uniquely suited for carrying out his murderous ideology if Himmler had been popular. I don't know. We'll leave that up question to other people, but we'll get back to the special mission next on Coast to Coast AM. This is Ian Punnett. How the course of human events might have changed if Heinrich Himmler had been voted to student council just once. A special mission, the name of the book, Hitler's Secret Plot to Seize the Vatican and Kidnap Pope Pius XII. We've been talking about this guy, General Karl Wolff, that Dan Kurzman interviewed back in 1974. It just took a while to get the book out on this little-known event in World War II. Now, Dan, let's lay out the plot as Wolff had to act on it, because he's really given he wanted 6 weeks to get it together, and Hitler said, "I'll give you 2." Or how did that work?
Yes, he wanted he wanted to get the job done as soon as possible, and he said that Wolff should call him every 2 weeks to let him know what the progress was, and he'd like to do it as soon as possible. You mentioned before you asked about why Wolff decided to sabotage the plot if he could. And of course, one of the reasons, as I mentioned, was that he wanted to save himself by getting the Pope's gratitude, so that after the war, maybe the Pope would put in a good word for him. But Wolff also, he respected power, and that's one of the reasons why he went with Hitler in the first place. And he saw the Pope as another one of the great and most powerful men in the world, who could capture men's lives, capture men's souls and their minds. And so he had great respect for anybody with tremendous power. And that's another thing. He didn't want to turn one of his powerful supporters against another man whom he thought was also very powerful and whom we respected a lot. That was one of the reasons. But the basic reason was that why he wanted to sabotage the plot was because to save himself.
Yeah, I like how you phrased it in the book, that he was sort of torn between the Antichrist and the Vicar of Christ.
Yeah, well, of course that's going to come out later when he actually, maybe I can mention that later after I go into the plot itself.
All right, so Hitler gives him very little time, says you got to get down there right away. Himmler's happy to see him go because now they've sort of had a little falling out, and Wolff gets down there to Rome. What's he? How did he start to figure out how he was supposed to do this?
Well, first of all, he drew up a plan for carrying out the plot, because if it were a question of him living or dying, he would have gone through with the plot regardless. But he also was plotting a way to sabotage his own plan. And what he did was he got in touch with some of the German officials in Rome and in the Vatican who were anti-Hitler. Most of them were anti-Hitler, actually, and they had the same idea, to try to save the Pope, from being taken a prisoner or killed or whatever, and particularly the ambassador, the German ambassador to the Vatican, Ernst von Weizsäcker, wanted to save him, mainly for patriotic reasons. He thought that the only way Germany could be saved was if the Pope became the mediator between Germany without Hitler and the Allies. This, could save Germany and also prevent the communist, Soviet Russia, the Soviet Union from coming into Europe. In other words, this was basically the same idea that the Pope had. The Pope wanted to become the mediator between the Allies and Germany without Hitler, and to try to and then the two sides would join against.
Ours is the largest artificial weather program in the world in terms of equipment, size, and budget, Wang said, adding that the annual nationwide budget for weather modification in China is between $60 million and $90 million U.S. dollars. For a largely agrarian country like China, the weather was thought of as far too important to be left to the whim of gods or nature. As a result, Chinese scientists began researching man-made rain as far back as 1958, and now China's weather officials have been charged with another important task, ensuring clear skies for the Summer Olympic Games next year. So they've brought in an important outside consultant, Simon Bar-Sinister. We'll see what happens. Reuters reports a walking robot that adapts to different terrain is helping scientists understand how humans move and could one day lead to improved treatment for spinal cord and other injuries. That according to German researchers on Friday. Previously, Runbot, the robot's inventors, said the 1-foot-tall machine could only walk forward on flat surfaces and would topple over when encountering a slope. But using an infrared eye, the robot can now detect an incline in its path and adjust its gait. You can see more on that at coasttocoastam.com. A key is the robot's brain. In this case, the infrared eye connected to the control circuits, which directs the machine to change its gait when needed. Studying a robot to gain a better understanding of how different parts of the body work when walking could have practical applications to improve health care in humans. Scientists have a way to go, however. As of right now, the robot takes 4 or 5 tries before it corrects itself and inexplicably seems like it cannot avoid running into ironing boards. Hey, that's just like me. One guy who has found his own scientific help in walking is also in China. In fact, there's a couple of Chinese stories here. We'll try and get them all in. When Peng Shulin's body was cut literally in half by a truck in 1995, it was a little short of a medical miracle that he lived. It took a team of more than 20 doctors to save his life. Skin was grafted from his head to seal what was left of his torso. But the legless Mr. Peng was left standing only 2.5 feet tall. Doctors at the China Rehabilitation Research Center in Beijing found out about Mr. Peng's plight late last year and devised a plan to get him walking again. And you can see the photos of this. It's fascinating. They came up with an ingenious way to allow him to walk on his own, creating a sophisticated egg cup-like casing to hold his body with 2 bionic legs attached to it. He's been taking his first steps around the center with the aid of these specially adapted legs and a resized walking frame. Go take a look at it. Mr. Peng, who has to learn how to walk again, said it's delighted. He's delighted with the device. It's very cool. The pictures are at coasttocoastam.com. Look at the link. While you're there, check out the photos of the world's tallest man, Bao Shishun, shaking hands with He Pingping, who might be Earth's shortest man. It's one of those contrived press photos. Hey, let's get the world's tallest Chinese guy with the world's smallest Chinese guy together and see what happens kind of things, but it's really interesting. You can see what happens, by the way, in the picture. In order to shake hands, if you look at the photo, you'll see there's another guy steadying He Pingping so that Bao Shishun doesn't, accidentally greet him out the window. Best part of the story? As it turns out, the world's tallest man and the world's smallest man actually hail from the same region of Inner Mongolia, and wouldn't you know it, went to the same high school at the same time and never knew each other. Different circle of friends, I guess. Frank Donnelly from the Detroit News reports from Marquette, Michigan. In the middle of the night, a group tried to lure an elusive beast from its lair deep in the woods. A man banged on a tree with a stick. Another beat his chest, Tarzan-like. Another uttered deep, guttural screams. And then seconds after the last yell, from the blackness surrounding them, came a low-pitched howl that made the searchers shiver. It was Bigfoot, at least they claim. The searchers not only believe the legendary Manish ape is frolicking throughout the forest east of this Upper Peninsula community, but also captured its mournful yelp on tape Thursday night. The Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization, the California group running the search, will add the audio recording to what it said are footprints, sightings, and other mounting evidence from past expeditions. I'm not a believer, I'm a knower, said the group's president, Matt Moneymaker. You've had to be in total denial to say that none exist. Don Young, a hunting and fishing guide from Phillips, Wisconsin, said he has wanted to prove the existence of big news stories we'll get to. For some regular headlines, President Vladimir Putin has angered Americans at a high level with his plans to deploy a missile shield in Eastern Europe. Formally notified the NATO governments on Saturday that Russia will suspend its obligations under the Conventional Forces in Europe Treaty, a key Cold War-era arms limitation agreement. They've put a deadline of 150 days for this action by Putin, and we'll know more whether or not they can negotiate a new settlement within that time frame. Democrats John Edwards and Hillary Rodham Clinton, considering themselves among the top presidential candidates, were caught by Fox News microphones discussing their desire to limit future joint appearances to exclude some lower rivals after the forum in Detroit on Thursday. I think this is important because of conversations we've had in the past about some of the quote-unquote lesser candidates that are out there that have a lot of popularity on the web and on this show. John Edwards says we should try to have a more serious and smaller group. That's what he's overheard saying. Meanwhile, Senator Clinton agrees, saying we've got to cut the number. They're not serious. She also says that she thought their campaigns had already tried to limit the debates and says, quote, we've got to get back to it. Immediately, Representative Dennis Kucinich responded that any group that's smaller, he ought to be automatically included in because on the campaign trail, nobody's smaller than he is. Osama bin Laden has a new video out, but investigators aren't sure how old the tape is. The tape praising jihadists may have been made recently, but bin Laden's part may be old. According to Wang Guang in crypto news, which you can find more on at coasttocoastam.com, Wang Guang, a name that's funny in like every language except Chinese, director of the Weather Modification Department in China, says each of China's more than 30 provinces and province-level municipalities today boast a weather modification base, employing more than 32,000 people across China, 100 anti-aircraft guns, which launch these weather modification missiles essentially into the air, about 5,000 special rocket launchers, and 30-odd aircraft across the country, all geared toward weather modification. Let's see, what radio show had been talking about that forever before it started to make mainstream news? Bigfoot, ever since spotting one near his home a second time in 2004. It's a need, he said. There's a need for me to prove it. Since the last sighting, he has devoted 60 hours a week looking for the beast. Sound familiar? Todd Standing can relate to this kind of obsession, and he joins us here on Coast to Coast AM. Thank you so much, Todd.
Thanks for having me.
I'll give you a standing ovation I'm sure you hear this sort of thing all the time, but thank you for coming. Now, Todd, tell me, do you know this guy, Matt Moneymaker, and this search that's going on in the UP?
No, I do not. I really have nothing to do with that. I'm actually more, don't know how to say it in any other way than I've advanced to the point where I can track these animals repeatedly. I mean, I don't have audio tapes and that kind of stuff because I've never really heard any audio recordings of the animals. I always support any hypothesis of the species that would allow it to remain absolutely, untouched and away from human beings. And what's strange about what a lot of the Bigfoot research people do is they seem to have exceptional success. They almost go out every time and always have success. And dealing with hunters, I mean, hunters, they go out and they hunt white-tailed buck deers, and they'll go out, 100 times and maybe have success once. So, I mean, whatever they're doing, it's far more successful than me. What I'm doing is I need to find a new domicile. I'm the guy that has the repeatability in the videos. I've shot 2 pieces of Bigfoot videos on 2 separate occasions. And what's significant about especially one of the videos, every time you watch a Bigfoot video, it's either a man in a suit or it's a new species of primate, because no other species on the earth can walk bipedally. And in both my videos, you can see the animal. Well, in the video 3 that I have, the animal moves entirely bipedally. And I was able to remove the ability or the probability of it being a man in a suit because I had a kineticist analyze the video, and he said that animal ran that trek faster than the fastest man on the planet could. So if it's not a human being in a suit, what is it? And it is a new species of primate, and my team and I repeatedly can do this. We don't go out into the woods with a camera and go, boom, there's Bigfoot. It's a huge amount of planning. You have to be very strategic about what you're doing. From my knowledge, and again, my specific knowledge is it's Gigantopithecus is the species that we're studying, and it's about Rocky Mountain Gigantopithecus. It goes all the way back into, just like you were talking, the Chinese people, which have the last known Gigantopithecus domicile, which is a couple 100,000 years old, where they found teeth and whatnot. It's way up in a mountain, and that's what I'm studying is Rocky Mountain Bigfoot. So
just so I can understand, and I appreciate your diplomatic language, but it seems to me, if I'm going to get to the bottom line on this, your suspicion last night's show with George Norrie, after he'd been on with Larry King Live, and did exceedingly well, I might add, then you already know a little bit about what's coming up tonight, both an update on Bigfoot. Perhaps you've heard the story about the reputed, anyway, audio that has been recorded of Bigfoot, which we'll talk about with Todd Standing coming up, but also some other updates as well from the man who knows everything about the cryptozoological giant. And then next hour, I don't think you want to miss this story, the little known and never known as well before story of Hitler's secret mission to kidnap all of the important top cardinals and bishops in the Vatican, including the Pope, very likely to execute all of the cardinals, perhaps to also kill the Pope, and then, most importantly, to loot the treasures of the Vatican. And the SS Nazi general that stood in his way, never before the details in this book and what you will learn about this intentionally failed effort to kidnap the Pope will astound you. And this secret mission has rarely gotten the kind of examination that you will hear tonight. I've been tracking stories about the distinct evil of the Nazi Empire for years, and yet there's things in this book, so many oh wow moments in the research of Dan Kurzman. You don't want to miss it. Coming up next hour, some crypto news to get to before Todd Standing on the way. It's Coast to Coast AM, and my name's Ian Punnett. Before we get to Todd Standing coming up in just a moment and the crypto news for tonight, let me just do a little housekeeping thing if I can on Coast to Coast AM. We are in the midst of a free Streamlink weekend. You can sign up and get details on the homepage. The free weekend runs through Monday. Free weekenders are able to download 8 free shows from the past few months, including the one I did a couple of months ago with Charles Lindbergh Jr. that people are still talking about. Everybody's still waiting to see whether or not he'll end up being right. And try out exciting features such as the classic shows, the live broadcast, audio clips, and the newest edition, the podcast with iTunes, which automatically downloads our most recent shows. So go take a look at it online, coasttocoastam.com, where you will also see some great crypto